Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me as always. 4 days of the NFL Combines were in the books last weekend. Here at Saturday to Sunday, we did an instant reaction podcast to all 4 days of the NFL Combine. A couple days have passed. Checked everything out, continued to look it over, rewatch things, and now want to go back one last podcast to kind of put a bow on the 2026 NFL Combine to kind of do a little bit of a stock report. I had an idea where everybody was kind of slotted in and projected heading into the NFL Combine, taking into my own thoughts on these players in terms of film evaluations. But in terms of the projection, I always use the people who are much more in the know, the Daniel Jeremiahs, the Todd McShays, the Lance Zierleins, the Mel Kiper, the Field Yates, and so many other great draft analysts out there to kind of get a feel for where these guys are in terms of their projections. And I do think the Combine starts to move the needle a little bit. So this episode is going to be around the horn, every positional group, talk about a stock up or stock down by position on who helped themselves or hurt themselves at the NFL Combine, keeping in at the forefront that, remember, the stuff that we don't even see on the TV goes the longest in terms of changing evaluations and changing draft stock. It's the interviews with the teams. It's the medical stuff. But the on-field stuff does move the narrative a little bit. Maybe it's the media. Maybe it's draft Twitter catching up to what the NFL already knows. But it is still a talking point nonetheless. And I do think it matters. I do think it helps sort tiers. I do think it changes people's draft stock a little bit. And that's going to kind of be the focus of tonight. I'm not going to talk about everybody who had good combine performances or bad combine performances. You can go back and listen to the Instant Reaction podcast. I think I did a good job going through all the guys who had good performances, good on athletic testing, good on field drills. Tonight, the focus is going to be on guys who I think move the needle in terms of their draft stock. And I'll kind of talk about where their draft stock maybe was, maybe where it's being talked about a little bit now. We're going to go straight through the positions. We're going to start the quarterback group. At the quarterback group, I think the two guys that maybe saw their, two guys that I think saw their stock move the most. We'll start with one, Ty Simpson. Ty Simpson's range, I think, prior to the NFL Combine was somewhere middle of round 1 to like pick 45 or pick 50 in the middle of the second round. He had a strong performance in terms of the on-field drills. He didn't do any athletic testing. All the reports since then coming out have been positive buzz about his interviews. That I do think now we're seeing teams meet with him. There's been some buzz about the Browns as early as 6 and other teams. I don't think he's going at 6, but I do think there's been enough positive momentum since the NFL Combine that I am squarely saying stock up on Ty Simpson. I don't think he gets out of round 1 now. And I thought prior to the Combine, there was enough buzz, there was enough talk of him falling out of round 1 that I thought maybe it was a possibility. I don't think it's a possibility. I don't think he's going top 10, but I could see a scenario where a team trades back in to the end of round 1, similar to what the Giants did last year with Jackson Dart, and makes Ty Simpson the pick there somewhere in the latter portion of round 1. So I do think it was a little bit of a stock up on Ty Simpson. I feel like he maybe improved his draft stock by a half a round or so. I thought he could have been an early to mid second round pick. I now think he's going to be a mid to late round 1 pick. The guy who I think helped his draft stock out the most at the quarterback position is Taylor Green. We talked about him a lot on the Instant Reaction show out of Arkansas, the elite athletic testing that he put on. He was at the Senior Bowl as well. When you talk about a quarterback class that is this week collectively, Taylor Green prior to the Combine was being talked about as maybe a mid to late day 3 pick, a project, a development. And don't get me wrong, he is still a project. He is still a developmental quarterback. But when you take into account how elite his athletic testing was, plus their measurements, plus some of the film that he put on last year showing some development as a passer. We saw Jalen Milroe last year go in the 3rd round to the Seattle Seahawks. I think Taylor Green's now draft stock starts at the late portion of round 3, possibly sneaking in the top 100 through round 4. So now I think he went from being like a round 5 to round 7 pick to being a late round 3 to round 4 pick. So I think his stock squarely on the way up. So I think stock up on Ty Simpson, stock up on Taylor Green. I don't think anybody's stock went down. I think Cole Payton's hold firm. I think he's still in that late round 3, early round 4 mix. I think Garrett Nussmeier's stock is still somewhere in that round 3, early round 4 mix. So I think most of the quarterbacks, same thing with Carson Beck. So those guys, I don't think moved their draft stock much. I think Taylor Green's went up. I think Ty Simpson's went up a half a round potentially as well. If we take this to the running back position, I'm going to say stock up on Mike Washington. He was one of the big winners. We talked about him in the instant reaction, but we didn't really get into the draft stock. I think prior to the combine, he was considered a late round 3, through round 4 guy. He was in a lot of people's top 5s, but I think there was a slim chance he went in the back portion of the top 100. But if not, somewhere in round 4, he would have been taken. Now I think he's 100% going on day 2. I think he's put himself in position that he could be RB2, but he's firmly solidified himself as RB3. And I'd expect him to come off the board most likely somewhere in round 3. But I would probably say the better chance now at the early to mid portion of round 3 than the latter portion. So I do think it was a big stock up for Mike Washington in terms of helping his draft stock, improving anywhere from a half a round to a full round, positioning himself as definitively the RB3 with a chance at the RB2 position. Another guy who I think stock up on was Damon Claiborne out of Wake Forest. He was a guy who, again, I think was in that round 5 to round 7 mix. I think in this draft class, with his pass catching ability, with his change of pace and receiving capabilities, I think we're looking at Claiborne now as an early day 3, somewhere early round 4 to, I'll say, mid round 5. So I think he's went from like a round 5 through round 7 player to now an early round 4 through middle of round 5 guy player, as a guy teams are going to be intrigued with the skill set that he can bring to a table in terms of the passing game, in terms of the change of pace. He can get 7 to 9 touches a game, and they could be really impactful touches. Stock up on 2 more running backs. 3 more running backs. Seth McGowan out of Kentucky. I think he, prior to the combine, the general consensus was late round pick, 6th, 7th round. I think his athletic testing at the size he is going to put him ahead of guys like Katron Allen and potentially Jonah Coleman. Now we'll see if those guys test and change the narrative a little bit. But I think we know those guys are not going to be big-time athletic testers. Seth McGowan came in at the same size, has good film, but tested out as a much better athlete. I think that is going to intrigue teams. So I think Seth McGowan has now pushed himself from that round 6, 7 range to now being a round 4, round 5 player with that athletic testing, with what he put on tape at the Senior Bowl and his film. So I think stock up on Seth McGowan. Jam Miller, same thing. I think he was in that round 5 to round 6 range. I think he's now put himself in that round 4, round 5 mix. He looked really good in the on-field workout. He tested out really well. So I would say stock up on Jam Miller. Also stock up on Adam Randall. Big back, 6'3", 233, former wide receiver. Tested out really well. I think he's now put himself in position to be a early day 3 guy somewhere in that early round 4 to early round 5 mix, and I think that might have bumped his draft stock up arguably an entire round. In terms of one guy I do want to bring up that I think stock down a little bit, and that's Emmett Johnson. I think going into the week of the combine, he was looked at as the clear RB3 by many and looked at as a top 100 pick. Now with the emergence of Mike Washington and how good he looked, I think he at least flip-flops with Mike Washington and goes from the RB3 in the class to the RB4 in the class. I think it pushes him out of the top 100. And now I think he goes from like a mid to late round 3 guy to somewhere in round 4. And there could be other guys that maybe even leapfrog him, like a Seth McGowan or an Adam Randall. I don't think so. For me, I still like Emmett Johnson's film enough that he's still going to be my RB4. But I do think he might have fallen a half a round as Mike Washington's went up a half to a full round. I think Emmett Johnson's the one who went the other way. So I'll say stock slightly down on Emmett Johnson. If we take this to the wide receivers, a lot of guys we can talk about here. So let me just kind of run down alphabetical and see who stands out. remember, this is not guys who just tested well. These are guys who changed the complexion of their draft stock. So the first guy on my list here, who I think the draft stock has now changed for a little bit, would be Deion Burks. I think Deion Burks was going to go somewhere on day 2, but I think more of the buzz was more like a round 3 player. I think now he's going to go round 2. I think that athletic testing, his ability to separate, his route running chops, his ability to get vertical and be a yak guy. I think Deion Burks is now ticketed, locked in for round 2. So I think his draft stock went up maybe a half a round to a full round, somewhere in that round 3 range, early to mid round 3. Now I think he can go off the board as early as like pick 40. I think 40 to 60 is now a sweet spot for Deion Burks somewhere in round 2. No wide receiver helped themselves more though than Jeff Caldwell. This was a late round prospect, potentially UDFA in this deep draft class. And now with this athletic testing at his size, I think Jeff Caldwell is now ticketed for the early portion of round 4, just because they don't make guys this big, this athletic, the length, the catch radius. I think Caldwell may have helped himself out by multiple rounds when you talk about how great and elite his athletic testing was at that size and what he brings to the table. So Jeff Caldwell out of Cincinnati, stock up. Next up, Omar Cooper. I think this was starting to happen right before the combine. We saw Daniel Jeremiah had him at like 18, but I do think heading into the combine, Omar Cooper Jr. out of Indiana was looked at as a late round 1 to middle of round 2 guy. Now I don't see a scenario after the combine. He tested out even better athletically with more speed. Now I think it's one of those things that he's not getting out of the first round. I just don't think he's getting out of the first round. He can win. Listen, is his vertical ability going to be his calling card? No, that's not just it. That's just not his game. But he does everything else really good. The ball skills, the play strength, the route running, everything about it you really like. And now he's put on good speed as well and tested out really well. So I'm going to say stock up by at least a half a round on Omar Cooper. I don't think late round 1 to mid round 2 is a possibility now. I think it's now somewhere mid to late round 1 for Omar Cooper Jr. Next up, stock down slightly, Malachi Fields. We talked about him a little bit on the instant reaction pod. Didn't test out well. I think he was getting some late round 1 to early round 2 buzz. Now I think he's squarely in the day 2 mix. So whether that means he comes off the board mid to late round 2 or early round 3, I don't think late round 1 or early round 2 is in the cards for Malachi Fields. He didn't have great production in college. That was more the Notre Dame offense, not him. And now 4.61 40, a really deep wide receiver class. I just think it's going to be more mid round 2 to early round 3 now instead of late round 1 to mid round 2. So I just think it probably moved a half a round or so when push comes to shove. I don't think the round 1's really in the mix anymore. I don't even know if early round 2's in the mix. I think more it's now mid round 2 to early round 3 instead of late round 1 through mid round 2. Next guy, Bryce Lance out of North Dakota State. I think he was on the border of maybe sneaking in the top 100. Now I don't see a scenario where he's not going somewhere on day 2. I think he's locked in. So whether that's a half a round bump or 20 pick bump or a full round bump, I think he's going somewhere now in the early to mid portion of round 3. And I think prior to the combine, he was being talked about more as like a guy who maybe sneaks in the top 100. If not, he's off the board the first 15 or 20 picks in day 3. I think now top 100 lock, early to mid round 3 is where to stock on Bryce Lance after his combine performance, the athletic testing, the explosiveness that he showed at the measurements. I think stock squarely up on Bryce Lance. And I'll say right there with him, Jacoby Lane. I think Jacoby Lane was in that late round 3 to early to mid round 4 range. But after he tested out as good as he did at his size, I think stock up on Jacoby Lane. I think he's another guy that goes in the top 100. I think we're going to have 16 to 18 wide receivers go in the top 100. I think Jacoby Lane is now squarely in the mix as one of those prospects. Next up, at the wide receiver position, Reggie Virgil. Slight stock down on Reggie Virgil. I talked about him a little bit on the instant reaction pod. He was getting some potential top 100 buzz. So I thought maybe he could sneak in late round 3, early round 4. He struggled though with the athletic testing. Still don't think it's going to kill his value or anything. I just think though, in such a deep wide receiver class, there's going to be so many intriguing options in the early portion of round 4 that I now think he went from a late round 3 to early round 4 guy to more of a late round 4, early round 5 player. So I think Reggie Virgil may have hurt his draft stock by almost a full round just for the testing. 4.57 for the style of player he is in terms of the measurements and stuff that he is. I think Reggie Virgil, slight stock down there. At the tight end position, not going to talk about Kenyon Sadiq because I think he was already a top 15 pick, and I don't think that's really changed. I do got to talk about the other elite athletic tester. Now is Eli Stowers out of Vanderbilt. I think he now went from that late round 3 to early round 4. I think he's now positioned himself potentially late round 2 to the early to mid portion of round 3. I think he comes off the board as the clear tight end 2 in this class. I think he comes off the board ahead of Max Clare, and I think he helped himself by anywhere between a half a round to a full round after his elite athletic testing at the NFL Combine. The other tight end that I think stock up on is Sam Roush out of Stanford. So I thought this was a guy somewhere in day 3, whether it was late round 4 or round 5. Now I think there's a real possibility late round 3 to the early to mid portion of round 4. I think it's hard to find a guy with his level of blocking ability and his ability to play in line at his size, but also be an elite athletic tester to help out potentially as a functional pass catcher. And maybe there's even a little bit more that meets the eye there. I'm getting a lot of Dalton Schultz type vibes from Sam Roush, who came out as a really good blocker and then it became a much better receiver at the NFL than we even saw in college. I think that could be the same thing could be said about Sam Roush. So I think stock up on him. I think those are the 2 guys that probably help their draft stock the most at the tight end position. Let's take this to the O-lineman. A couple guys here that we got to talk about that I do think help their draft stock based on their performances. The first one that I want to talk about, let me just make sure I'm not missing anyone. First one I want to talk about is Monroe Freeling out of Georgia. I think he's pushed himself now from the late round 1 mix to I think now the top 15, top 18 picks are squarely in. So yes, it's still, he was going to always probably go round 1. But now I think instead of being in the 20s or late round 1, I think there's a possibility he's somewhere in the 13 to 16 range. 13, I don't think he's makes it out of the top 20. I think a team could look at him and maybe he might even surprise and go ahead of a couple of the more recognizable name tackles that we've been talking about in the process as well. So I think stock up on Monroe Freeling. Another guy, Max Ionacher out of Arizona State. I think he was considered a top 50 prospect, but I think now there's a real possibility he goes late round 1. And if he somehow sneaks in, he's going to be a guy that teams are trying to position themselves to the top of round 2 to take Ionacher at the top of round 2. He's new to the game, big time athlete, developing, but there is his ceiling at the offensive tackle position might be higher than anybody in this draft class. Another stock up, Logan Jones out of Iowa, the center. I think he's now ticketed for the early portion of round 4. Would I even be surprised if he comes off the board late round 3? No, I wouldn't. I think he went from a guy who was more of like a round 5 guy to now maybe an early round 4 guy. That it was a really good workout and athletic testing for Logan Jones out of Iowa. Going through the tight that Kalen Rutledge, I think he went from a guy in that late round 3 to mid round 4. I think he's now solidified himself as a day 2 pick. Really strong combine performance, the athletic testing and the on-field drills really helped his cause as well. In terms of stock down, I don't even really want to put stock down on it, but I do think it's at least something we got to talk about how the length of Spencer Fano. He's still arguably the number 1 offensive lineman prospect in this draft class, but I do wonder if the length potentially moves him from tackle to guard boards for more NFL teams. And if that is the case, or maybe even a center switch, if that's the case and teams are looking at him as center or guard, I think that takes them out of the top 5 consideration, out of the top 6, 7 consideration. I think you start getting into like that 8 to 12 range, maybe the sweet spot for him if teams have him on the guard or interior offensive line stack and not the offensive tackle. I still think there's going to be teams that want to give him a chance at the offensive tackle. So I'm still going to say that he's still going to go in the top 10 or so picks in the draft. And I think his versatility and his ability to kick inside and maybe be an elite center or a really good guard could come into play if potentially can't stay at right tackle. So it's a stock down, but we're talking very marginal. If we take this to the defensive tackle, I'm going to say stock up on first one, Zane Durant out of Penn State. He was more of like a round 5, round 6 player coming into this. I just think his top level athleticism is going to push him to more of the round 4, round 5 mix. And teams are going to hope that they can harness that athleticism to potentially be a penetrating 3-tech interior disruptor. Another guy at the offensive tackle position, I think Grayson Halton out of Oklahoma. He went from a guy who was more steadily in the day 3 range to I think now early day 3, maybe even late day 2 is in the mix for Grayson Halton based on his upside, his athletic profile, situational pass rusher, a lot of things you can do with him. So I think stock up on Grayson Halton by a half a round. Lee Hunter, I'm going to say slight stock down going into the combine. I think most people said he's going off the board in round 1, potentially the first defensive tackle taken. I still think it's possible he's the first defensive tackle taken, but I also think it's equally as possible is that he falls out of round 1 and he goes in the early portion of round 2, night 2 of the NFL draft. So I do think where he was looked at going into it as a rock solid, definite round 1 pick to now I think there's a possibility he could be there early to mid round 2 based on his poor testing numbers. So I think slight stock down on Lee Hunter. Other guys in terms of people who move the needle, I think Peter Woods. He didn't do anything there, so I don't even really want to consider him much. But I still think it was a little bit of a missed opportunity, so I want to put him on the stock down list. Going into the combine, I thought he was definitely a round 1 guy. But then he doesn't test, but I was under the impression he was going to test out as a great athlete. He doesn't do anything, so now we continue to waiting game with him to see. He came in, what we did find out from him is that he weighed less than we expected, his length was shorter than we expected, and then he didn't mitigate those concerns by blowing it up with a big-time athletic performance. So I'm going to say slight stock down there on Peter Woods in that regard. So slight stock down on Lee Hunter and Peter Woods, Zane Durant and Grayson Halton, stock up on those guys. If we take this to the edge rushers, a couple guys that I want to talk about here in terms of stock up, stock down. I'm going to say small stock down on Ruben Bain because I do think prior to the combine, you had some people maybe putting him in the mix at the Jets at 2, the Cardinals at 3, or the Titans at 4. Post-combine mock drafts, you are not seeing Ruben Bain at that 2, 3, 4 spot at all. And I think that's because some of those other guys tested out so great. Elite athletic testers seem a little bit less questions about them. And if you take the positional stuff out of it, I just think they're the safer pick and they could be a legit all-pro Hall of Fame type player. Ruben Bain's length is going to be concerning to some teams. It's not going to be a major drop. When I'm talking about stock down here, we just haven't heard him much talked about in the 2 to 4 range anymore. I think more we're thinking about him now in like the 8 to 11 range or 8 to 12 range or 7 to 10 range. So I just think it's a small stock down on Ruben Bain. Hopefully he goes to his the pro day, test out as a above average athlete. So there's at least not athletic concerns with the length concerns. Because I think that's where you could really, it could kind of spiral a little bit and that would hurt his draft stock a little bit more. Some other guys, again, I'm looking for guys who might have changed their draft stock, not just tested poorly or not. I do think Cassius Howell, based on the non-explosive jumps and the size and the length, could push him from the middle of round 1 where I thought he was going to the latter portion of round 1. I still think he goes round 1. Wouldn't be stunned if he fell to the early portion of round 2. But I think mid round 1 now is a little bit less likely for Cassius Howell. And I think it might be a little bit more the back end of round 1. So I'll say a small stock down on Cassius Howell in terms of his draft stock. Malachi Lawrence. He went from a guy that late round 3 through round 4 to now I think he's locked in top 100, top 75 is a possibility. The athletic testing, the size, the frame, the upside he possesses. I think Malachi Lawrence out of UCF ticketed somewhere in round 3 and the top 100 pick. And besides that, I'll say slight stock down on Wesley Williams. I thought he was maybe an early day 3. He tested out pretty poorly. I think that might push him down the board a little bit, more of like a round 5 guy. And I think the early day 3, early round 4 might not be in the cards for Wesley Williams. If we take this to the linebacker position, a lot of guys stock up. Let's start with the obvious. Sonny Styles positioned himself from being a top 15 pick to now I think he's locked in top 5, could go as high as 2, 3, 4. I don't think he gets out of the top 5. So I think before the combine, he was like, maybe he's top 10. Maybe he goes to the Commanders at 7. Outside chance the Giants at 5. But somewhere from that 7 to 15 range was what people were doing for Sonny Styles. Now you don't see a mock draft that has him fall basically further than 5. Maybe somebody has him fall to the Commanders at 7. But most people now have him in the top 5. Some people have him to the Giants at 5. Some people have him even earlier than that, to the Titans or the Cardinals in that 3 or 4 spot. People have talked about it even at the Jets at number 2. So I think his stock has obviously significantly improved. Another guy want to bring up whose draft stock changed. Remember, this is guys who I think their draft stock changed from their combine performance. I'll say Kyle Lewis, because I thought he was going to be more of a round 3 guy based on the size and frame and play strength questions. I think now he's ticketed somewhere in round 2. If he comes off the board early to mid round 2, I would not be surprised anymore based on what teams can do with that athleticism, the range that he could offer, the cover skills. So I think stock up on Kyle Lewis. Also, I think stock up tremendously on Jacob Rodriguez. We talked about him on the Instant Reaction podcast. This is a guy who I think was going to go round 3 somewhere. But if he would have went mid to late round 3, I think that's where most people had him ticketed, because I think most people said, yeah, great instincts, great play recognition, great tackles for loss and forced fumble production, but he's an average athlete. Going to hurt his draft stock a little bit. But then he goes to the combine and he tests out as an elite athlete. So now you put elite at level athleticism on top of the instincts, on top of the play recognition, on top of the ball production, and it's hard to see Jacob Rodriguez getting out of top 50. So we're talking about a guy who went maybe from that 75 to 100 range to now I think he's in the top 50 range based on how well he tested out and looked at his pro day. If we take this to the defensive backs, let's start with the cornerbacks. A couple guys I want to hit on. Tacario Davis, formerly of Arizona, then Washington. I think he's now positioned himself to be a late round 3 or early round 4 prospect prior to the combine. I think most people had thought his stock had fallen to the middle of day 3. I think he's now pushed it up to the early portion of day 3. So I think stock up on Tacario Davis. Stock up on Colton Hood. I think he tested out a little bit better athletically. I think he was on the border of late round 1 to early round 2. Now I don't see him getting out of round 1. I think Colton Hood has solidified his status with his athletic testing, with how good he looked on the drills to potentially be locked in top 20, top 25 type pick. Chris Johnson out of San Diego State. I think he was another one of those guys that some people thought he could have went late round 1, but maybe his range all the way took from late round 1 to like middle of round 2, like pick 50. I think now his range is much tighter. It's now like 25 to 40. If Chris Johnson doesn't come off the board in the latter portion of round 1, I think he's coming off the board very early on night 2. I do not think there's much of a chance he falls out of the first couple of picks of round 2. And I think round 1 is a real in the mix right now. When I say stock for now down on Jordan McCoy, we still just haven't seen anything yet. So it's hard to envision a team right now picking him in the top 12, top 15. So I thought he was more of a mid-round 1 guy, and I think he could still end up there if he does stuff before the draft. But if he doesn't do anything before the draft, I think his stock at best case scenario is late round 1. And I think there's a potential if he does nothing before the draft that it could fall out of round 1. I don't think that's going to happen. I do think he is going to do something, whether it's at Tennessee's pro day or he does an individual workout. I do think he's going to do something. I think he's going to test well, and that's going to push him back into the middle of round 1, 15 to 20 range. But I do think, at least for right now, he doesn't do anything. We still haven't seen him get on the football field. So I'm going to say slight stock down for Jordan McCoy, maybe to the latter portion of round one for now, instead of the middle portion of round one. Avion Terrell, last stock up guy at the corner position. If we're going to I'll keep trade on Stooks and put him with the safety group. But Avion Terrell, late round one to early to port or middle of round two, I now think there's again, similar to Chris Johnson, I think 20 to 40 is the board for Avion Terrell. I think there's teams in the first round that could easily invest in Terrell. And if, again, just like Chris Johnson, if he happens to fall out of round one, I don't think he's going to be there very long in round two. I think you'll see within the first 5 to 10 picks of round two, these corners that have round one skill sets are going to come off the board. So I think stock up on Avion Terrell. And then at the safety position, it was a great safety group. Again, guys that we saw improve their stock. Not going to talk about AJ Halsey because I thought he was a day two guy, still a day two guy. Bud Clark was a day two guy, still is a day two guy, tested out really well. So we're looking for those guys who move the needle a little bit. So the first guy that I really do think helped their cause is Sonny Styles' brother, Lorenzo Styles Jr. This is a guy who I think many had round 6, round 7. Does he even get drafted? Maybe he's a UDFA. But now I think we put into the mix based on that athletic testing. I think the middle of round 3, round 5, early round 6 is very much in play for Lorenzo Styles Jr. He is switching. Obviously, he was a former wide receiver, so he's still relatively new to the DB position. He has some versatility maybe as a cornerback or free safety. So I think there's different things you can do with Lorenzo Styles as well. Plus, he tested out, obviously, as an elite athlete, 4.27 40. So I think stock up on Lorenzo Styles Jr. potentially helped his draft stock by a round or two. I am going to mention Dylan Thiemann out of Oregon. I think he's now solidified himself as a top 20 pick. I think he could have found his way towards the back portion of round one. I think he's now ticketed himself to the middle of round one, somewhere in that 16 to 20 range. I think you're going to see him come off the board for sure. One other stock up guy, Jalen Kilgore out of South Carolina, or Kilgore out of South Carolina. This was a guy who I thought he was more of a late round 3 type player, maybe even sneak into the early portion of round 4. No, now I think it's very possible. He's not a mid to late round 3 guy anymore. Now he's probably a round 2 guy. Plug and play, as Darren Jeremiah said, nickelback. A lot of things you can do with Kilgore. So I think stock up on Jalen Kilgore after his performance at the combine, how good he looked in the on-field drills as well. So there it is, guys. NFL Combine stock report, talking every single positional group, stock up, stock down, based on their draft projection, right? If you want more in-depth on their actual testing numbers and how they looked in the on-field drills, get back to the Instant Reaction podcast. Did them for all 4 episodes, went really in-depth on their athletic testing numbers, on their on-field drills. This was more of a picture to kind of put a bow on the NFL Combine, hit every positional group who actually, I think, helped their draft stock. Now, again, it comes down to is maybe the draft Twitter and the media were a little bit behind the NFL, but I'm just going by based on what the projection and the image of these players was prior to the combine to where it is now. These are the guys that I think have moved up in perception and potentially now are going higher or a little bit lower. Most of the guys I talked about have helped their stock. Talked about a few guys who hurt their stock as well. If you're enjoying this content, I think you're really going to like what's coming up over the next couple of weeks. We'll probably have 1 or 2 free agent frenzy episodes where we talk about the impact of free agency on the NFL draft and then we'll tie in the fantasy aspect of it as well. How the signings impact players on the team that they are joining, players on the team that they left, that in terms of dynasty value. We'll also do a whole thing on how does it impact the NFL draft, which is what we're talking so much about. So we'll probably have 1 or 2 free agent frenzy episodes. Then we will turn the attention to our exclusive Tier Buster series. We have exclusive tiers that are based on film evals, stock projection in terms of like their draft projection for the current NFL draft, tied in the fantasy component in terms of your dynasty rookie drafts, all mixed into one to create these exclusive tiers. We'll do 4 Tier Buster shows. We'll do the quarterbacks, the running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. I'll share my tiers. I'll share my tiered rankings. I'll talk about who could potentially still jump up a tier as I watch more film, as pro days come in. Maybe some things I'm still waiting on help me sort my tiers a little bit, but I'll give all my tiers. You'll get 4 episodes of them. So a couple free agent frenzy episodes, followed by the tier buster shows. That'll probably take us through the month of March. And then I'll start getting some guests from the industry, picking their brain, looking into what they think about this draft class, have some good conversations with them where I learn stuff. They pick my brain. Hopefully they learn some stuff from me as well. And then before you know it, it'll be a week or so before the draft, and we just keep pounding out episodes, my guy episodes, final rankings episodes, projecting the draft episodes, 4 episodes, maybe the week or so leading into the NFL draft, and then instant reaction podcast every single night and day of the NFL draft. And then the day after the NFL draft includes a dynasty rookie ranking podcast. So the month of April, just show after show after show. But March, we still got a lot of good content, great content in March. Make sure you're following along. Get over to the website, S2S Football, fastest and easiest way to get there. For $9.99, you can get all of our premium notebooks. It's the lifeblood of what I do here. Every single dollar that we get goes right back into the show, server fees, subscription fees, everything we need. You get free notebooks. You get the scouting notebook with all my scouting reports, strengths, functional areas, developmental areas, NFL role, how they win, fantasy spin for the people into that. You get the rankings notebook, all our different rankings. There's so many different rankings in there, whether you're fantasy, whether you're just draft content, so many different things. And then in April, you get the draft projections notebook, tabs for every single player, offense and defense, scouting report in terms of how they win and some developmental areas, their combine testing numbers, ranked in the order in which I think they're going to come off the board, not from my rankings, but from all the people I trust most in the industry. I kind of listen and hear to everything that's going on, everything that's being talked about, and I kind of rank them in the order in which I expect them to come off the board to give you a guide to really help guide you on NFL draft weekend on how I expect these guys to come off the board based on all the great experts out there with all the inside intel to kind of help set the stage for you. We do a projecting top 32 board, a projected top 100 board, and a projected top 257 board in terms of what prospects will come off the board in order at each position. For all of them, we've had great success with our projection numbers of how many of which prospects come off the board night 1, top 100, and all 7 rounds of the NFL draft. It's $9.99. It's the best way to support the show. We hope if you purchased it in the past, you purchase it again. If you're new to Saturday to Sunday, we'd love for you to check it out. $9.99, you get it all. Helps us out tremendously here to continue to do what we do. Next time on air, there's going to be a lot of movement in the NFL. It'll probably be a couple days after free agency starts, maybe next Thursday or so. I'll give a couple days. Free agency, I believe, starts on Monday. So we'll get a lot of information Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I'll probably recap it all a week from today. And then we'll let a few more days pass, do another recap show of the second wave of free agency before we start the tier buster shows as well. So on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.